And as we wrap up our look at the year in politics on this edition of Public Affairs on Peach, we look toward the future. Let's start with Emory University Associate Professor of Political Science, Dr. Andra Gillespie. Okay, Andra, what do you think the Republicans need to do to win those midterms?
Well, they've got to put a GOTV operation together, so they've got to be able to build infrastructure, and people are going to have to figure out how they're going to distinguish themselves from the Trump administration, and that's going to be really difficult because you still have the Steve Bannons of the world who are going to try to move Republican candidates to the right via primary challenges. And so I think for moderate or even establishment Republicans to be able to find their voice and to stand up for what's right, that's actually going to be in the long term in the better interest of the Republican Party.
So you think that they actually need to not align themselves with Trump?
Yes. For the long-term health and vitality of the party, I think yes.
Rashad?
Yeah, I tend to agree because a party is something that outlasts a president. It outlasts candidacy. So if they are going to be viable in the market of politics, they have to figure out a way to expand their base, not shrink it. They have to also figure out a way to become the moral party again. Right now, the standard bearer, as Trump is, cannot bear the standard. The morality of the Republican Party is no longer discussed.
But people felt that they weren't being heard, and that helped fuel his rise.
This is a rubber band effect. I think people have figured out that jumping off the cliff may not be the best way to go. When midterm elections hit, I think enough disaster will be in this country as far as race relations, as far as policy, and also generally the tax plan that's being proposed that I do think will pass, but it will ultimately be a failure for most middle-class Americans, and they will feel that by midterm elections.
Okay, let's look to the 2020 presidential election. Who do you think is in the running?
You know, I think Cory Booker is going to make a strong showing, but I will say this, similar to how Barack Obama came on the scene out of nowhere, I think that's what the Democratic Party needs to instill some excitement back into the base. All of the regular people, we already know them. They haven't been the choice since, and I don't think they'll be the choice moving forward.
People like a dark horse on the Republican side. Who do you think, Andra?
Well, you know, I think it looks like John Kasich wants to run. All of his television appearances suggest that that may in fact be the case. I think one would have to see whether or not somebody like Jeff Flake would try to gain the moral high ground and run for office. With the speculation about Paul Ryan perhaps not running for re-election in the House, which he is shut down. But just in case that's true, there may be some speculation about whether or not he would try to challenge President Trump.
And what about President Trump? Are we going to see him as the Republican nominee?
You know, I think that that's really hard to predict. I mean, one, I think we need to see what the Russia investigation reveals. I think we also need to factor his health into consideration. So I think people need to be prepared for him to run, but I think people also need to be prepared for him not to run.
Will he run?
I doubt it. I doubt he makes it to the next chapter. I don't think he will be a four-year president in one term.
Okay. Let's go to state politics. Governor Deal is term limited 2019. Who's going to be our next Georgia governor?
That's difficult. Georgia has no statewide Democrat, period. It is tough to win in this state as a Democrat. You have Stacey Abrams. You have other people who have put their name in this ring. I think at the end of it, it will come down to whoever can create coalition and can bring moderates to the table in the state of Georgia.
Is it going to be a Republican?
I mean, the fundamentals still privilege a Republican in the state. If we're looking at the top four candidates running for the Republican nomination for governor, we still have that fight between the more establishment wing of the Republican Party versus those who are more on the Trumpian wing. And I think it's a question of what type of primary voters turn out to select the Republican nominee for president. On the Democratic side, Georgia is but a microcosm of this national sort of fight about whether or not we should go after working class whites or whether you should go after people of color. And so that's going to play out here in terms of whether or not it's Stacey Abrams versus Stacey Evans.
Touching off on that, let's talk about Keisha Lance Bottoms, next mayor of Atlanta. Biggest challenge?
I think one, it's seeing through the end of the investigation in City Hall, and so trying to work on transparency, and then building bridges across the town.
Is corruption going to be the big deal again for Keisha Lance Bottoms?
I don't think so. I think her big deal is uniting Atlanta. We have a very divided city right now, and that city is divided by way of race, and then second by way of politics.
What do we need to look out for?
You have to look out for people wanting to undermine her leadership. And I'm not just talking about individuals who are not part of the political mainstay. We're talking about mainstream political figures in the city of Atlanta who do not want her to succeed.
Biggest surprise that you think we should be on the lookout for this coming year?
I think every surprise with the Trump administration is a surprise, and so we're not surprised that every day or every other day there's some big headline news or multiple headlines. And so I just think it's a matter of just waking up and figuring out sort of what thing happens next, what shoe drops.
Biggest issue?
With who?
You tell us. Is it going to be national focus? Is it going to be in Georgia, the governor's race, or at the mayoral level?
I really think the biggest focus right now will be the midterm elections, because it will give an example to the rest of the world what happens when you elect a political disruptor.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Rashad Richey, Dr. Andra Gillespie,
you.
and thank you so much for joining us for this edition of Public Affairs on Peach. Have a great day.